We also find that if a particular penguin has suffered more from the cold than he is capable of sustaining, he will be allowed to stay in the warm spot until he has recovered. The other penguins will shuffle around him and take his turn, and when he's fully recovered, he'll then take his turn again. The principle is that the strong look after the weak, and they do it automatically. Now that's amazing, isn't it? Because we don't think that happens within nature, but that's exactly what happens. The strong look after the weak, and they do it automatically. And so it should be with the church, particularly the local church. Everyone should share the burden to the limit of their ability, but we should always have a warm spot for those who can no longer sustain the load. The strong should look after the weak, and they should do it automatically. What we find in most churches is that the weak are just cast aside and they go by the wayside. And very few churches understand this principle, that there needs to be a warm spot that the weak can go into, and those that have, they mightn't have started off weak, they might actually be leaders, but the time comes when they need that warm spot, and if the church hasn't got a warm spot for them, they lose them. They just go off into the wilderness. And the church needs to understand this need for the strong to look after the weak, and they should do it automatically. It shouldn't be an issue with the churches, right? We marvel at the penguins' ability to survive, and we wonder why they set themselves apart from the rest of the world in this way. Is there a reason for it? Well, as we watch them, we discover that there is a reason, for eventually we realise that they've all been incubating their eggs, and gradually we begin to see signs of baby penguins hatching. The result of their congregating is that their numbers grow. If they didn't congregate, they wouldn't be able to go through this process of incubating the eggs, and so their numbers wouldn't grow and they would die out. And so it is with the church. If we truly congregate, we will see our numbers grow. Amongst the penguins, they all depend on each other to survive. And because they depend on each other to survive, they look after each other. And so they are able to incubate their eggs and their numbers grow. The better they work at congregating, the more of them there ends up being. And so it is with the church. If we truly congregate, we will see our numbers grow. If we don't truly congregate, we will just see people go by the wayside, and the churches will not grow. And when we look at the churches in general throughout the Western world, this is what we're seeing. Very few churches are really growing in the way that they could be or they should be. And we need to think about whether or not it has to do with the fact that we truly congregate or we don't truly congregate. Another thing we see about the penguins, particularly when there are young ones among them, is that they are very forgiving, right? Because they're so crowded, they're all pushing and shoving each other all the time, and little ones are tripping over the feet of the big ones, and we think, well, they need to be whipped into gear, but no one of them takes offence if another brushes against him or bumps him or pushes him or treads on his toes. And this is a real lesson for us in the church. To congregate, we must give and take a lot. We must be very forgiving. And to do this, we must work very hard at being difficult to offend. Now, the problem in our Western world is that everybody is so easily offended that there's no real room for give and take, right? We must be very forgiving. We must work very hard at being difficult to offend. people will offend us, and we need to learn to be difficult to offend. So if they want to offend us, they have to work really hard at it. Right? And if we are like that, we'll find that we can live with most anybody within the church. And if we can't do that, then we'll find that very soon we'll say, I'm just too offended, I'm going to leave. But we need to understand that just like the penguins, we cannot live without each other. So let us make sure that we learn, just like the penguins, how to live with each other. This is the thing that the church in the Western world lacks so much. When we look at the church in the Eastern world now, in China and India and those countries, Africa, where there's persecution, we find that those people learn to live together and to depend on each other. Their very lives depend on each other, and those churches grow. And then we come to the Western world and we're so easily offended, and we so easily can go to another church, and we can so easily not be faithful to our own congregation, and so easily we just let our churches fall to pieces. And so just like the penguins, we need to understand that we cannot live without each other. And so let's make sure that we learn, just like the penguins, how to live with each other. So now as we come to the end of this lecture, we have the basic concept of the church. Its primary function is to worship. It consists of all saved individuals, and so it's universal. These individuals will, if humanly possible, assemble themselves in local churches, and so it's local. And these churches will congregate in the sense that we've talked about, and as such, when they congregate, they will be the body. So we'll go on to the next lecture and look at what the body is and see how the body is the church and the church is the body.